Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Welcome to another episode of the Artsy Raven, and I'm your host, J.F. Garrard. Today we are talking to Kara H.L. Chen. So Kara grew up near Cleveland, Ohio, where she once had to shovel snow off her car with a plastic trash can. She now lives on the West Coast with her husband and daughters and is learning how to use an Instapot. She has an undergraduate degrees in English and economics, a JD, and an MFA in fiction. She has used her economics degree exactly once when she tried to make a joke about marginal costs and marginal returns, and it did not go well. So welcome, Kara.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
You have how many degrees? Like 4 degrees?
I, um,
Yeah,
I like school.
I know. I like school too.
Our
I'm
whole
the same. My
family does it.
husband won't let me go back to school anymore. He's like, it's my turn, and he doesn't want to go back, so it means never. But
Yeah,
anyhow,
it's fun. I love it. I love the university, atmosphere. I love learning. So yeah, but I'm also on hiatus from getting any degrees.
yeah. Although I mean, I still have nightmares sometimes about missing an exam. Like I'm dreaming, and I was like, oh no, no, I'm gonna miss my midterm or something. And it turns out, yeah, I'm not in
I
school
do
anymore.
too. Isn't that so funny? I just did like the other month. It was just this it was a paper though. It was I had forgotten to write a
Okay,
paper and I was just
yeah.
like
Okay, so tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started writing. I mean, none of your, well, I mean, you have an MFA in writing, but how did it come to this point?
Yeah, I've always been interested in reading and writing. I was really lucky. I had parents who really supported that. So we went to the library every week. I read a lot as a kid. My mom would buy me these like little journals and cute pens from Taiwan and stuff like that. So she always encouraged it, and my dad always did as well. So I feel like I grew up reading a lot. And just from there, I've always been writing. I remember as a kid, I would have these little, construction paper books. I would staple them and I would like write little books. So I feel like I've just been doing it my whole life. And I've just been lucky enough to now be able to get a book out in the world, which is unbelievable to me. So.
So tell us a little bit about the journey of your new book, Love and Resistance. Like, what was the inspiration and how did you get it published?
Yeah, well, I actually had the idea for it almost exactly 10 years ago in 2013. And I had this little kernel of an idea. And I had done an MFA and I graduated in 2009, but that was the same year I had my first baby. So I was, feeding her foods and listening to podcasts about how to write a story and all this. So it took me a couple years to kind of get it together and how to figure out how to construct a novel, how to do character arcs, how to do all this stuff. I had certainly gotten an introduction to that in my MFA program, but this was really, it's kind of like you watching a cooking show and you turn off the TV and you're like, yeah, I can do that souffle. And then you leave and you're like, oh, so it was very much I left the program and I was like, yes, I can write a novel. And I was just like, I'm not sure where to start with this. So it took a couple years to I tried, a fantasy series and that did not work, and a literary novel and that did not work. And finally this one, I was like, I think I can figure out how to finish this one. So I finally finished it. And then I tried once in Pitch Wars, not knowing any better, with 37,000 words. I tried entering Pitch Wars. 37,000 words is not a novel. It's like for the record, it's like a novelette. It was very short. It did not get picked. And then I revised it from there, and I did DV Pit. It must have been 2020. I did DV Pit, and I luckily got some agent interest, and then I was able to get an agent, not through DV Pit, but through that whole round. And then we went on sub, and luckily it got picked up by my amazing editor, Jen Ung. And yeah, since then it's been about exactly 2 years of just revising, and now it's about to come out, which is amazing.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Tell me a little bit about the pitch war stuff that you did. How does it work?
Pitch Wars is great. It was an event where they have established writers, and they agree to mentor and kind of revise your manuscript with you. So you submit a query and a synopsis and some sample chapters. It's almost like querying for an agent, and you hope you get picked. Sometimes you get feedback on it, sometimes you don't. I entered with this one, and then I tried 2 years. The subsequent 2 years with a different manuscript. And then I finally finished revising this one and then went on DV Pit with this one. So yeah, it's been quite a
Wow.
journey.
Yeah. I mean, how do you deal with like not getting picked the first time? I mean, a lot of people, I think, like it's a bruised ego, So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, no, exactly. It's not, it's definitely not easy. And it was hard. And I definitely thought to myself, well, if I do not get picked, would I still keep writing? And for me, like the answer was always yes. Like it feels like something that I feel, for better or worse, very compelled to do. So if I kind of look, I was like, well, if I look at it that way, if I'm going to do it anyways, then it doesn't matter if I get picked or not. Like I'm going to continue. Like it doesn't matter if it gets published or not. It doesn't matter if it gets picked up on sub or if I get an agent or whatever. Like it's just something I have to keep doing. So I was like, just put it out there and just set it out there. And if it gets rejected, that's fine. You're just going to continue. It's not like that's going to change anything in the equation. So that's kind of how I looked at it, which was helpful, especially when it was on submission. Like that's like a very long process as well. So you're just kind of, you just kind of have to keep the big picture in mind. For me, it was very helpful to do that.
Did you have to do any, like, because you said that you didn't work the first time, so did you do any special preparation for the next time for Love and Resistance?
Um, yeah. So for a DV Pit, you mean? Yeah. I read more books about how to plot a book and like how long books should be because I did not know that being a newbie. And really I had some great friends who were critique partners, and I had them reread it, and I just revised it and just revised it and revised it and revised it. I think when I first submitted to DV Pit, it must have been like the 15th version of it or something. It was like I revised it a lot just to kind of get it to the place where I felt comfortable with it.
So the website is, do you have a website you could recommend for doing this? Um, DV, is it DV
Um,
thing, or is it
yeah,
just that it
let's see.
happens more?
Not a cent. Yeah, yeah. Not a website, but I had two books which I loved. One was Wired for Story, and that's by Lisa Cron, and the second one was Save the Cat Writes a Novel. And those two books I think were very good. And I listened also to a lot of screenwriting podcasts. I know that they are kind of like a cousin of the novelist writers, but just in how to construct a story. Like I feel like my big weakness was like, how do you make a book? Like you have an idea and you have idea of these characters, but how do you make that into a book that people want to read, so being able to do that, those two were kind of invaluable in teaching me how to look at what the character wants, the obstacle, the 3-act structure. I remember I was listening to a podcast and there was someone talking about the 3-act structure, and I was like, I was like, and then I was like, oh, this totally, the midpoint, the second act break, the first act, like these all, like you kind of know this maybe intuitively if you read a lot of books or watch a lot of movies, but actually having it like broken down into like a formula or not a formula, but a set structure is very helpful to kind of just have it in your head. So
Now, did you already do you did the MFA before you started this? Like, did you have any lessons learned from, because I imagine you do a lot of writing over the few years at university.
yeah, the MFA was amazing. I loved it. I went to Brooklyn College, the MFA program. So if anybody's applying, it's fantastic. And we do a lot of short stories there and a lot of novel. And it was really great because of course you learn a lot about like how to construct a sentence, how to read a story critically, how to read other works of literature critically as well. But the one thing which I didn't realize that I learned, which kind of came into play 10 years later when I was on sub, was that you learn how to take a large amount of feedback and incorporate it into your own work. And I think that's actually something that's a practice skill, because, we would have a workshop. I'm not sure how familiar you or listeners are with workshop, but you have a short story, you submit it, and 25 or 20 of your peers who are amazing writers themselves sit down, and you sit at a table and they give you feedback for an hour. You can't say anything. They give you feedback for an hour, and you get a stack after the workshop of their comments or whatever. And so you get a lot of, like, these are all amazing writers. They're in the program with you. You've read their work. They're fantastic. But you get because every reader brings in their own experience to the work, you get a variety of comments. Like, there can be someone who, like, I love the ending. Oh, I hated the ending. The beginning worked for me. The beginning was my favorite part. You just get this whole cacophony of voices. And your first instinct, or at least my first instinct as a writer, was like, you just want to put in everything, right? Because you're like, oh, well, they didn't like this, so I'm going to, and they didn't like this, so I'm going to change this. But then I think that's easy to lose the core of your work. So protecting that, like identifying what the core of your work is, and protecting that part, while being able to get the notes, and like the notes behind the notes. Well, why didn't they buy this character arc? Why didn't they buy the ending? Why did they think that the beginning was not strong enough, or whatever? And being able to do that is a super important skill set. I didn't realize I picked it up. And then 10 years later, I go on sub, and, agents have feedback, editors have feedback. And that is the skill that you have to be able to say, okay, well, this person has this vision for my book, and this person has this vision for my book. And if I revise it according to this vision, it may not be my intention for the book. So you have to kind of be able to negotiate that process. And that's a really good skill to have, I think.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I've been to writing groups where people give feedback, and I know
Yeah,
there are some members, I don't think they've ever been to a writing group to receive
yeah,
critiques, and they get
yeah,
really offended, and then they drop out the next
yeah,
time because they just couldn't handle it. But it's part of the
yeah,
process of developing a thick skin. And like you say, you sort of have to understand where your core is. And when people give
yeah,
feedback to improve, you don't have to take everything. It's, you sort of see what will work with your core vision, and then, go
yeah,
with it.
yeah, yeah.
So you keep talking about sub. Like, what can you explain a bit about the sub? Is that's the
Yes.
pitching
Oh, I'm so
you're talking
sorry.
about? No, it's
Yeah,
okay.
I'm so sorry. It's okay. Yeah, that's so once the agent signs you on,
Oh, okay.
then you may revise, and that's the submission process with the editors. Sorry, I always
Okay.
call it sub.
So you did
Yeah,
your MFA, you wrote your
yeah,
novel. Well, you wrote one, you wrote
yep,
two, and then you participated in these pitching wars online, and
yep,
then got an agent
yep,
that way. And then you went into the
yeah.
sub process. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's yeah, the sub process is interesting because when you're querying, if you get a rejection from an agent, you can kind of send things out, you can be like, okay, well, I got a rejection, but I can send out like 5 more. But in sub, I always think of it as like I was watching the Mars rover, and they like send it off, and there's this 7 minutes where they have no communication, where you're just like, I hope my Mars rover doesn't explode. It's kind of like that. Your agent like shoots off your manuscript into space, and you're like, oh my gosh, I hope that this thing doesn't crash and burn. But you're just you just have to wait for it. You have to wait for the responses to come in, and it's kind of it's a process. Yeah.
So tell me a bit more about Love and Resistance, like sort of the plot or the back cover synopsis, if you will.
Yeah, it's about a 17-year-old girl. She's her mom's in the military, and she's had to move around in a lot of schools, and she is normally very she keeps to herself. She doesn't want to get into any trouble. But she also loves military history and strategy. And one day she gets this racist comment from the popular girl, and she just can't hold it in anymore, and she defends herself, and she becomes a target of this girl. but she ends up joining a secret society. I call them a secret society of nerds, but they're like a secret society of students who've been kind of thwarting this girl for months, trying to help out the victims of all the bullying. And they unite together with her strategy and their kind of sneaky tactics. And they try to change the hierarchy of the school.
So what inspired this book?
I had this idea of this. I just thought it was so funny, this idea of the secret society of nerds, this kind of like underground nerd network, I like, so that's, it all started with like that little idea and grew from there. But it did, I went on sub in 2020. This was during the pandemic. And it was during a time of, as you probably know, like a rise in Asian American violence and racism and all that. And a lot of that got incorporated in revision. There was an element of it in the original draft, but I feel like I had a lot of feelings about it and a lot of unprocessed kind of anger and grief about what was happening in our community. And I was hopefully able to incorporate that into this book as well, because it's a lot about, taking time to think about other people's perspectives before judging or before taking actions against them. And I feel like for the Asian American community, like it was a moment where a lot of, I feel like racism, for me, I was a person who grew up in Ohio. Like I was one of very few Asian Americans. It was something that seemed to me very private. Like it just happened to me all the it happened,
Yeah,
but
it
it wasn't
happens.
something that I
Yeah.
talked to my, yeah, it
And you
happens. Of
move
course
on.
it
You're like,
happens.
okay,
Yeah.
whatever.
No,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's something I never talked to my parents about or anything, but there was this, like, I feel like during the pandemic, there's this moment where I'm calling my parents. I'm like, oh, you have to be careful. And they're calling me and they're like, so there was like this discussion and this very communal, I think, communal suffering that happened, and trying to process those feelings, I think made its way into the book as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think as an Asian living in Canada, it's sort of you
Yeah.
just you're supposed to cope with it, like especially like you're an
Yeah,
immigrant and you should be grateful you're
exactly.
here, so just be quiet and you just
Exactly.
sort of
Yeah,
suck it up. Like
exactly.
I'm talking to
Exactly.
people about
Yeah.
Asian Heritage Month and they're like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, see, like it's not really promoted. Our voices
Yeah.
aren't as loud as other
Yeah.
groups." Um,
Yeah.
but hopefully over time we'll see as
Yeah.
to what happens. Because with all this stuff about diversity, it's great. But at the same
Yeah.
time, I do have a fear of backlash because I think
Yeah.
some people will feel left out, obviously. And then,
Right. Right. Right.
like there's this whole thing about firing diversity officers right now. And like that's a bad
I know.
sign. So,
I know. I know.
it's
I
sort of
mean,
going
here,
backwards
yeah.
now. So,
Yeah. Yeah, no,
yeah.
exactly. I mean, here in the US, I'm sure you've heard about like all these book banning efforts. And like, I feel like, we like, especially YA and Kidlit has been making such amazing strides in getting diverse books on the shelves. Like, when I grew up, I think Claudia from the Babysitters Club was an
Yes,
Asian
Claudia,
American character.
yes.
And like,
Yeah.
and like,
Yeah.
that was it. That was it.
Yeah,
It was like,
pretty much. Yeah, I
yeah,
remember
it's
reading Sweet Valley High all the time. And then I think by the time I hit
so
grade 6, I was like pissed. I was like, oh, I'm never gonna be blonde and 5'6" and perfect, am I?
I was just about to say Sweet Valley High because they were like,
Yeah,
they were size 6, blonde hair, blue eyes. I was like,
yep,
God, I
yep.
don't,
I know.
but I feel like,
Yeah.
yeah, but I feel like we've been making such amazing, I mean, there's so many great books out there now,
Mhm.
like so many great diverse books. And I really do, like with the book banning and with this kind of like backlash against diversity and whatever, I'm hoping that that is something that it doesn't get, doesn't get lost in the
Yeah,
next couple years. So,
yeah.
yeah.
We'll see what the future brings, but hopefully, things will be okay. I mean, Michelle Yao, won a bunch of stuff, and
Yes.
that's a
Yeah.
big thing. So, um,
Huge. Huge.
it's
Yeah.
huge. So we'll see how things are going. So, what is the latest project you're working on now? Are you allowed to talk?
Yeah. It's a book called Asking for a Friend. It's coming out next year. We're in
Oh,
edits right now.
Okay.
And it's about, it's loosely, very, very loosely based on Emma by Jane Austen.
Mm.
And it's about a girl named Juliana Zhao, and she starts a dating advice column with a Taiwanese American boy that she grew up with. She like 100% believes in romance, and he's a super cynic, and shenanigans ensue. But it's a lot. This is my big book about the diaspora experience. I think it's about being raised in one culture and having to live in another one, and the friction that happens when you're told one thing at home, but the outside world doesn't operate in that fashion. So it's a little bit of romance, a little bit of Asian American representation. So hopefully fun. I hope people like
Oh,
it.
well, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you're going to do a bit of a reading for us. So can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about the scene and then start reading?
Yeah. I'm going to read from the opener. So it's just the very beginning of the book when she first arrives at Plainstown High School in Ohio. It's one of her, I think maybe her fourth school in 7 years. So she's moved around a lot, and this is her introduction to the new school.
Okay, cool.
And I'll show my cover. Show
The
my cover.
cover.
Okay. Chapter 1. Welcome to Plainstown. Surviving high school is all about strategy. Your goal this day, as it is every day, is endurance. To do that, you must become invisible. Do not go to the cafeteria. Do not go to the science wing, where social media supernova Mitzi Clark has a monopoly type reign over the real estate. No. If you are on the fringes, like me, you go to the bathroom first. You stay there until the pre-homeroom bell, and then you walk to your locker, briskly, but not running, as running will bring you attention, and attention is bad. Grab your books, then slide into your homeroom without making eye contact. The last is very important. Go from class to class. Do not volunteer unless called on, and wait for the sweet final bell. Then you start all over again. I know this because my mom's in the military. I've gone to 4 different schools in 4 different states. Trust me. In order to avoid long days of torment, you've got to be tactical. I've never been popular, but I've never had food chucked at me either. I'm good at being stealthy. At one of my schools, I'm not even sure anyone knew my name. I was just the new girl. I consider that one of my biggest successes. Sometimes they called me the Asian girl, which was obviously horrible, but c'est la vie. School number 4, the predictably named Plainstown High School of Plainstown, Ohio, was, well, plain. I was both new and a junior, which was a terrible combination. Even worse, Plainstown had a closed lunch period, which meant that I was basically trapped on a battlefield, armed with nothing but overly preserved meats and small containers of nearly expired milk. Sigh. Getting through lunch now would take savvy, sophistication, brains. It was not for the amateur or the weak. Luckily, I was neither. The first objective, examine the terrain. Plainstown lunchroom also doubled as a small assembly room, so it was filled with those long faux wood lunch tables with the parallel fixed benches. Excellent. The key to this sort of setup is the end seats. Never ever sit in the center if you are trying to be invisible. First, you'll have to do that awkward leg swing over the fixed bench and will inevitably trip and land on your face. Second, you will be surrounded by people, most likely popular people, who will immediately notice you. That is no good. The most successful outsiders are those who can keep their exposed sides minimized and protected, kind of like countries in the middle of a land war. Look here. You can see some kids have already caught on. I recognize the red-haired guy from my English class, an overly passionate defender of poetry, eating by himself at one of the ends. A few tables over, a quiet guy from my French class also secured an edge. Then, problem. The rest of the safe spaces were occupied, which meant that I would have to ask someone to scoot over so I could sit down. Crap. Lightning decision, who to ask. I scanned the seats. Poet guy, French guy. Giggling BFFs, no. Lovely couple. No. Gah, this was taking too long. Poet guy or French guy? French guy didn't speak much, so he was less likely to tell me off. Fine. Bonjour, mon nouveau ami. I took my tray, school purchased lunch, perfectly average, and made my approach. Do you mind if I said. French guy was clearly startled that someone was speaking to him. He scooted to the left. No protest. Good choice, Olivia. And then we proceeded to eat our lunch in silence, side by side. By the end of the week, I no longer had to ask. French guy, who I learned in class was named Monsieur Griffin, first name unknown, would silently scoot. We would silently eat our delicious school lunches, and then, at the bell, we would silently get up and go to our separate lockers. I began to notice stuff about French guy since, well, I was smushed up against him for half an hour per day. 1, he always wore a tiny pin on his backpack, a shiny red circle. I was dying to ask what it was for, but that would mean, actually conversing, so no. 2, Monsieur Griffin was quiet, but he was expressive. Like when he saw Mitzi Clark cut in line during lunch, he unleashed the most eloquent eye roll I had ever seen. He also had expressions for seriously when the cafeteria posted a list of terrible cheese puns on Mac and Cheese Day. He gave me a little smile when he caught me making a face at "Have a good day." A subtle smirk for when he was amused, when I got overly excited about my French fries 2 days ago, and a blank expression for when he was trying to be invisible. The last I couldn't quite get. Monsieur Griffin was handsome, not in a flashy kind of way, but he had a certain je ne sais quoi. He wasn't tall, but he was far from the shortest in the class. He was smart, but not a show-off. He wasn't exceptionally athletic, but he wasn't completely uncoordinated either. He liked to wear these dark red chucks and indie band t-shirts, which was interesting, but not particularly unusual. I didn't understand what set him apart from everyone else, but it was clear he welcomed the distance. Some girls in class tried to speak to him, only to be politely but firmly rebuffed. In fact, the only person he seemed to converse with, and I use the term loosely, as scooting over on a cafeteria bench once a day was not really conversing, was me. It kind of became my personal challenge to make Monsieur Griffin communicate with me, even if it was nonverbal. It violated my rules against personal interaction, but I couldn't help myself. I should have stuck to the rules. End of chapter.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing your work. And I look
Yeah.
forward to your new book that's coming out next year.
Oh, thank you.
Okay,
Thanks
have
so
a good
much for having me on.
All right. Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank you.
For more upcoming episodes of the Artsy Raven about writing and publishing, visit us at jfgarage.com/arpodcast. A reminder to Patreon subscribers that there is bonus content available for every episode on the Patreon website. If you enjoyed the show, you can show your appreciation by buying us some digital coffee. The Artsy Raven is produced by J.F. Garrard. The voice in the show's introduction is Chris Gorman, and music is by Tim Moore. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe.